You're listening to Colorado Chamber Office Hours, a podcast that explores what matters most to business. I'm your host, Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. Let's get talking. Welcome back, everyone, to our final in-session episode of Colorado Chamber Office Hours for the 2026 regular legislative session. This week, specifically by the end of the day on Wednesday, May 13th, the session is constitutionally required to end. And as such, these final 3 days will be a sprint in which ideas that have been under discussion since January, and in some cases for longer, will get their final up or down votes and determine the rules that the state and businesses in the state will be operating under for many years. Every year, though, it seems there is one very big idea that surfaces just in the final week and a half of the session, and this year is no exception. That new and very big idea is House Bill 1430, which takes several steps to reduce transportation funding in the general fund budget for the next 3 years. Wait, you may say, don't we need to do more to fix our roads? Yes. The answer and the reasoning behind HB 1430 isn't quite that simple, though. And to hash all of that out, we have with us today one of the primary sponsors of the bill, Representative Andy Boesenecker, a Democrat from Fort Collins and the President Pro Tem of the House. Thank you, Representative Boesenecker, for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Ed. Really appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for the deep engagement on all these issues that really matter to folks in our communities. It's a service to our state.
No, thank you. Thank you. Well, I hope this one will serve people who are watching this bill and wondering what it does. And frankly, I've now clearly left out a lot of details and left our listeners hanging on a cliff's edge. So tell us, first of all, where did House Bill 1340 come from? Why are we considering this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think a lot of folks are aware of, or will be aware of soon, a constitutional amendment that is certainly out there circulating, gathering signatures so that it can appear on the ballot. That is Initiative 175. At the end of the day, Initiative 175 would divert roughly $700 million in existing funds to a new definition of road transportation for the state of Colorado. There is roughly $538 million of general fund that is implicated inside of that, and then roughly $200 million of cash funds that are implicated inside of that proposition. That's particularly difficult in another budget year where we've had to make $1 billion+ in cuts. And so for the state of Colorado, I think we're very aware that there's not simply $700 million sitting out there that is waiting for a good use. And I would also say at the same time, I recognize, as so many folks do, that roads and transportation in the state of Colorado remains an ongoing concern for our communities. We have to do more to figure out ways to fund a modern transportation network. But as it stands, Initiative 175 would mean trade-offs for other things that I think folks also think is important, like hospitals, K-12 education, higher education. And so 1430 is born out of the concern for that trade-off, that ultimately what would happen if Initiative 175 were to pass is that you have now a constitutional amendment that takes $700 million away from things that I think folks really value and perhaps aren't aware that that is the trade-off that's being made when they sign on the dotted line to say, yes, we should fix our roads.
So how exactly does 1430 work? And I'll let you go into that in the detail which you'd like. But I think the big question for a lot of people is, wait, how does this make the budget easier if this were to pass and Initiative 175 were to pass?
It's a great question. I think it doesn't necessarily make the budget easier. It holds the line on some very deep and I think painful cuts we've had to make over the last several years. So were Initiative 175 to pass, it has impacts inside of this current budget year. So I'm assuming we would have to come back in late November and true up what is now at least a $350 million delta from what the budget we passed anticipated to what now Initiative 175 would do. At the end of the day, what 1430 does is it does two things in particular. It reduces state revenue in certain ways by fee reductions, gas excise tax reductions, etc. It also replaces certain expenditures that were paid out of the general fund for transportation by these new $175. So it becomes basically a situation where Proposition 1 or Initiative 175 wouldn't actually gain any additional revenue for the state. It would be utilized to pay for the things that we already need to fund so that we're not having to make deep cuts to other services.
And so I know that there are a lot of people, particularly one that we'll talk to after you today, that says this is, well, there's been wonderful language used for this, undercutting, taking the knees out of 175. And it sounds like, if I'm hearing this right, basically, if this were to pass and 175 were to pass, there wouldn't be any new funding going to roads. Is that the case?
Well, that's correct. And I think, there's a case to be made about how the question is framed in the first place. So if we're saying that we're taking the knees out of an initiative or undercutting the voters, or the word has been used like undercutting the democratic process, that assumes in the first place that voters are being told the full picture of what they're signing up to support initially. So if I were to ask you, do we want to fix roads in the state of Colorado? And would you like for that to cost you $0 extra every year? Of course, you're going to sign that. Who wouldn't? I mean, but some deals are too good to be true. If I were to tell you that we can fill a pothole, but we're going to have to close a hospital, I wonder what you would say to that same proposition. If I were to say we can fill a pothole, but we're going to have to reduce your child's school to 4 days a week instead of 5 because education funding is going to take a hit, I wonder what you would say. Or your student at CSU or CU or one of our state institutions will face tuition increases because 175 takes dollars that otherwise would go for these things, then I think it's a very different question. And that's the story that's not being told outside of supermarkets where folks are gathering signatures. They're simply being asked if they want to fix our roads. I would sign that. But I think the difference is, what is the dedicated revenue source that they're going to tap into that isn't already obligated towards things that folks value and, quite frankly, keeps our communities safe?
So let me just ask you on the issue of roads, and you live in a community where a lot of people travel on the roads up there. You've
Yeah,
got you've
I
got
commute every
I-25
day.
cutting through it.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
but I mean, do you feel that? Just let it be a standalone question. Do you feel we need to improve the roads? And if so, as someone who deals with the budget, how do we go about doing that if not by one initiative 175?
Yeah, absolutely. There is more to be done in terms of making sure our transportation infrastructure is safe, to make sure that folks can get where they need to go. I mean, I have long supported the expansion of I-25, especially up north by me. That has been a bipartisan effort to make sure that we're getting what we need to make sure that the I-25 in particular is safe. But of course, there's state highways that are impacted, rural communities that are impacted as well. Yes, we need to do more. But I would also point out Senate Bill 21-260 dedicates roughly $500 million a year to that same purpose. And the primary focus of that has been to really make sure that we are spending dollars not just in communities like mine, but in rural communities that otherwise, absent 260, probably do not have the tax base to be able to do those projects. And so it was an altogether approach. And I think that is the approach we need to continue to have. If we silo these efforts to say, well, the contractors are going to go it alone and put a constitutional amendment on the ballot, then what's to say that the hospitals won't do it next and the schools won't do it next? Just not the way budgeting works in our state. And you can't excuse yourself from the responsibility that you have from looking at this problem holistically.
In that case, then, I mean, do we look for another measure, or do we have to rely on what 260 is doing for a number of years? I mean, for the people who are signing on to Initiative 175 and may not have thought, as you say, about the full consequences, can they expect any boost in road funding, or is the message, look, this is all you're going to get?
Listen, I am committed to a conversation and we need to have it. And I wonder in part if that conversation shouldn't look a little bit like what we've done with RTD or artificial intelligence, where you have a process that lives outside of the building to really make some long-term recommendations about how we can sustainably fund transportation in the state of Colorado past what 260 is doing. I think that is a very fair conversation to have, one that I think needs to happen. And at the same time, I also think that folks may not understand that what they're being asked is not really the implications that they're looking to solve.
One thing I don't think should be overlooked in this, you talked about we're going after a couple sources of funding, we're reducing them. But this theoretically, if 175 and 1430 passes, is going to cut what people pay at the gas pump, isn't it?
That's right. It's a reduction in the gas tax for 3 years, the special fuel tax for 3 years. It would toggle back up. And the idea there is that we give the legislature some flexibility to be able to, see how this is working, to be able, if, 175 passes, to be able to reevaluate where we're at in a few years. Of course, they could do that at any point. It's statutory. But I think it signals that, there is a need for a deeper conversation. And that's what we're looking for. I should mention as well that 1430, should 175 fail, 1430 does not go into effect.
It is a good point. It's worthwhile. One last thing I want to ask you is we've heard during debates What are your constituents going to think about this? Have you gotten any feedback yet, or is it too early in this debate, this having just been introduced and going through, to understand what people think about this effort and how it interacts with 175?
Yeah, I mean, in my community, I'll use a good example. We had Front Range Passenger Rail is doing a series of town halls across the state to be able to just hear feedback from communities. One of the first questions that was asked in the Fort Collins Front Range Passenger Rail town hall, I was there, was what happens if 175 passes? Will Front Range Passenger Rail still go forward? And my answer to them was similar to what I'm saying to you. I think there are unintended consequences of what 175 would do that jeopardizes long-term transportation planning in our state. We cannot take that liability. And I think what will happen as a result is, maybe folks are signing that petition and it seems like a great idea to fix the roads. It is. We need to. No argument there. But I think what we will have to answer to on the back end of that is, where were you when they cut education funding? Why can't I have an OBGYN unit in my community anymore? Why are these clinics closing? Emergency rooms will stay open. But, folks are driving 4 or 5 hours to be able to seek the services that they rely on in their communities today. That's not just bad for them, it's bad for business. And I think at the end of the day, we have to recognize that.
Representative Andy Boesenecker, co-sponsor of House Bill 1430, which is going to be one of the most talked about bills in these final days of the session. Thanks for talking about it with us.
Ed, thank you for the opportunity. Always appreciate it.
Now let's shift the conversation. We have brought in Tony Milo, the CEO of the Colorado Contractors Association, which is the group that builds, whose members, I should say, build most of the roads that are driving on and that are going to be affected by Initiative 175, House Bill 1430, and the interaction thereof. Tony, thanks so much for coming on here today.
Thanks for having me, Ed. Appreciate it.
So first of all, let's set the grounds here. Tell me about what 175 would do, assuming it gets on the ballot, and why you've brought this.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity. Initiative 175 would dedicate 2/3 of the sales tax collected on automobiles and auto parts and dedicate those to roads. Over the years, there's been portions of that sales tax dedicated to roads, but right now there's none of it is going to transportation or roads. And the voters have told us, we've done extensive polling statewide over the last year, and voters have told us they want those taxes going to fix their roads. They are frustrated at the state of our roads, and they believe they pay enough taxes that the state should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, fund critical services, including roads. And so 175 really forces the General Assembly to do that in their budget process, to spend about 2% of the total general fund on roads, which we think is reasonable.
And the numbers that we've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that would create about $700 million a year for roads. What would that do exactly for our road system? I mean, $700 million is a big number, but fixing roads is an expensive thing. So how much would this make a difference?
Right. It sounds like a big number, and it's a significant number when it comes to fixing our roads. CDOT has about a $350 million shortfall just to maintain current levels of service. So this $700 million would go into the Highway Users Tax Fund and would be distributed between CDOT and cities and counties. So CDOT would get about 60% of that $700 million. Cities and counties would get the rest. So it would have a significant impact. It's going to take years to really get back to where we should be and fix our roads and expand roads, improve safety, reduce congestion, improve pavement quality across the state. But this will be a significant amount of money to really start moving the needle in the right direction.
So not a simple ask, but one that people can understand. And then 1430 comes into play, gets introduced here in the last 10 days of the session, and basically, as Representative Boesenecker just explained to us, would ensure that there's not actually new money going to roads because it's cutting out a lot of the money now going to roads. How do you view 1430? I guess I'll just start with the big picture question. I mean, how do you feel seeing the legislature trying to push back against you in this way?
Yeah, well, 1430 is, it takes, as you said, a pretty simple ask to just dedicate 2% of the state's budget to roads, turns it into a very convoluted way of getting around the voters, really. I mean, at the end of the day, what 1430 says is we don't care what the voters want to spend their tax dollars on. We, the General Assembly, are going to spend it on what we want to spend it on. And it's a very convoluted process. It actually reduces the gas tax and registration fees that are now dedicated to transportation to offset that $700 million or so that roads would be getting from the general fund. So that at the end of the day, if the voters vote for 175 and say, yes, we want some general fund money dedicated to roads, they would just lose it on the other end, and it would be a wash at the end of the day. However, our members, the proponents of this measure, are not dissuaded in any way by 1430. Our members are saying, you know what? You legislators who vote for this bill are going to have to answer to the voters as to why more money isn't going to my roads after I voted for 175. So this is heading to be a very interesting election year, and we're just going to have to see where it all lands.
Well, your members may not be dissuaded, but this certainly throws off what you're asking for votes for right now. I mean, how do you rethink whether you go forward with this? Is there anything that you look at in here that says, well, maybe this is still an opportunity for us? Or how do you put forward a ballot campaign knowing that that the legislature is kind of cutting out the message that you're trying to sell here?
Yeah, that's a great question. What the way we're looking at this is, if both 1430 passes and 175 is approved by voters, roads are really trading a declining revenue source, which is the gas tax. It's declining because cars are becoming more fuel efficient. There's more electric vehicles on the road. The gas tax has long been a declining revenue source for roads. We'd be trading that for the sales tax, which is a revenue source that grows every year as the economy grows. So it's not a bad trade when it comes to funding roads. And we think we can still sell that to the voters that again, it's trading a declining revenue source for a growing revenue source. And it would be locked into the Constitution that it would have to be spent on roads, which is what the voters have told us they want.
Now, it's a way to find a silver lining there. I assume, though, that you're not going to let up on fighting 1430 as it's going through.
No, we are continuing to lobby against 1430. The coalition opposed to 1430 continues to grow. Even organizations that are not sure if 175 is the right answer are appalled that the legislators would do something to do an end around the voters and disregard what the voters say. So it's become much bigger than 175, much bigger than road funding. 1430 has now become a focal point of, should legislators have the right to preemptively set something up so that they can ignore the will of the voters.
And you've heard all of these questions over the past few days, but the proponents of 1430 say, look, we can't afford this kind of shift of funding essentially away from higher education, away from healthcare, away from schools, because those are priorities. And the voters may not know that this is what's going to happen if they vote for 175. How do you answer that, both from the perspective of do you feel like voters are educated enough to understand what's happening, and how do we fund these services if so much money is going to be going to one dedicated source rather than the general fund?
Right. Great question. Colorado voters are smart. They're informed. They've proven that time and time again. They understand the issues. They understand right now the crisis in the budget. They also understand that the budget grows 4 to 7% every single year, year after year. You look over the last 10 years, Colorado's general fund budget has grown by about 7% per year. They look at their own budgets and say, wow, if my personal budget grew by 7% a year, I'd figure out how to fund my priorities. And they think that the legislature and the General Assembly has failed at funding the priorities. And that's what they're asking folks to do with 175, is to get your priorities straight. Your budget grows by 6 to 7% every year. Figure it out. Roads are just as much of a priority as healthcare and education. And those are the things that should be prioritized in the state budget.
One other thing that your measure does in terms of prioritization is it puts money, transportation funding, to roads specifically. There are those out there who will say, we need to put more money into our transit system. Why go just to roads? Why not spread this among transit, bike paths, etc.?
Sure. You'll remember the chamber was a big part of passing Senate Bill 21-260 in 2021. That measure, which was passed and we supported, dedicated an unprecedented amount of money to transit and electrification and environmental mitigation. 175 does not touch that funding, does not divert that money in any way. So all of those enterprises that were set up in 260 and funded at an unprecedented level for transit, multimodal, environmental mitigation, electrification, those all remain, and we'll continue to fund all of those efforts.
Fair enough. Last question I want to ask you, and just envision for me, if 175 and 1430 both pass, what's different about our road system in 10 years? And if only one of them passes, let's say only 175 passes without 1430, what's different about our road system in 10 years?
Well, if they both pass, it is going to force a bigger conversation. I think that we know we're going to have a new governor. We know we're going to have new leadership in the House and Senate next year. And if they both pass, I think that it's a clear message to the leadership here in the state that voters care about roads. They are frustrated and they want some of their tax money going to roads. So if they both pass and roads aren't being improved at the rate that the voters think they should be, our legislative leadership and our new governor are going to have some explaining to do. And it's going to force a much bigger conversation about the priorities of the state, how leaders are spending state tax dollars, taxpayers' dollars. And so if they both pass again, I think that short term, roads won't be hurt in any way. We're going to be basically the status quo, at least for a couple of years. But again, 1430 has a sunset of 3 years. So in 3 years, all of the gas taxes and fees come back. They're all dedicated to transportation. And in 3 years, it could mean a lot of extra money for roads. Like I said, at the end of the day, if both pass, we'll take a growing dedicated revenue source, i.e. the sales tax, over a declining revenue source. So long term, if both pass, we think it's still going to be good for roads.
Tony Milo, CEO of the Colorado Contractors Association, thanks for coming on and talking with us about House Bill 1430, which is both a bill about transportation funding and a bill about so much more at this point.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me.
That's it for our interview segment. Now let's take a quick look at what you need to know about the week ahead. The final 3 days of the session are going to be all about floor work and hastily called committee meetings. So I'm not going to use this last segment like usual to tell you about when to watch for bills. Instead, I want to go over all the bills we've talked about this year, and I want to tell you what they have left ahead of them in these final 3 days. 6 of the bills we talked about are dead. The allowance of local governments to charge vacancy taxes, price gouging on captive consumers, the 2 bills that sought to tax alcohol, the bill that sought to allow lot splitting, and the bill that sought to cap minimum lot sizes. All of those are dead, and we won't be talking about them anymore. Meanwhile, several of the things we discussed are on their way to the governor as we speak. He is expected to sign the regulatory reform measure, the measure that consolidates all of the state's workforce development and higher education initiatives into one new department, and the child care continuation tax credit. Meanwhile, he is expected still to veto the bill that makes it changes to the Labor Peace Act to make it easier to unionize. That leaves a number of bills that still have pathways to go in the last couple of days. Most of them are in the Senate. The bill to protect workers working in extreme temperatures has been cut back pretty significantly. Now it's all about data collection and coming up with model plans for employers. That is still going to be debated in the Senate. So is the bill that would allow Colorado to begin regulating workplace safety. This also has been cut back. The Colorado Department of Labor and Employment is no longer involved. It's all about the Attorney General's office stepping in if OSHA rolls back rules. That bill is still controversial and will be debated. Also, the arbitration reform bill is still moving ahead in the Senate. It has had a couple of minor amendments, but largely it remains unchanged and is still opposed by many members of the business and legal community. That will be debated in the Senate. The 4 tax bills that we discussed are looking very different than they were even a week ago. 2 of them, the ones that involve decoupling from federal tax breaks and getting rid of some state tax breaks or rolling them back, such as the break on net operating loss, look like they could be in trouble and may not be advancing. A bill that is about removing the exemption on downloadable software is moving ahead, but it also is changing, and it's possible that bill could end up sending some of the money that is saved not to the Family Affordability Credit, but to restaurants to help them through this time instead. The 4th bill that deals with the 80-20 Water's Edge rule is moving ahead, though businesses have significantly fewer concerns with it now. The Senate also will be debating House Bill 1421. That was the bill that would ban non-attorneys from owning law firms. There has been opposition that's come up to this bill since we discussed it. However, it's continued to move ahead and looks like it's on course to go to the governor's desk. Finally, the bill we talked about just this episode that would redirect or cut a lot of transportation funding will be in the Senate and will be maybe the most hotly debated bill of the final 3 days. Lastly, I want to bring up one bill that we did not discuss specifically in an episode this year. And that is because, frankly, this bill has been changing so much and so quickly, we could never nail it down and get people on the show to talk about it. That is a bill that would put fees, or at least originally proposed putting a $40 million fee on the 5 largest health insurers in Colorado to help balance the health insurance affordability enterprise, which covers 3 programs: the reinsurance program, the Omnisalute program for undocumented immigrants, and programs that involve getting subsidies to people who buy individual insurance on the state's health exchange. That $40 million fee is out of the bill now, and it's moved forward with some new funding sources. There remain a lot of questions about the enterprise and whether it will be sustainable and can continue to pay out money the way that it has these last couple of years. That is going to be something very interesting to watch, but we will say that the big business concern that health insurance rates were going to be going up because of new fees is done. So, good luck following everything these next 3 days. I'll be watching them closely. Continue to look at tsscolorado.com, the sum and substance. We'll talk to you again after this session is finally done. That's all for this episode of Colorado Chamber Office Hours. Once again, I'm Ed Seelover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. I'll keep the conversation going at tsscolorado.com, and we'll see you next time as we explore the issues that matter most to business.